Gracious God, thank you for bringing us together for this day of worship on this Mother's Day. This is a beautiful time to see God's people gathered, the larger family of God. Thank you for birthing us. Thank you for bringing us into this community, for shepherding us, for guiding and directing us with a loving and powerful hand that you are here once again, guiding and directing us as we prepare to meet the challenges of this week. And Lord, speak to us again afresh through your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. This morning, I want to continue in Luke's gospel. We went back to Luke chapter 24 last week, and I want to do so again this morning as well as we come to Luke chapter 24, verses 36 to 43. And you'll remember last week, Jesus met two disciples on the road to Emmaus. And then they hurry back to Jerusalem. And as they return to the upper room, they're immediately told that Jesus has appeared to Peter. And so there's this incredible synchronous moment where their joy is just doubled. It's elevated to this new level. And this morning we're going to continue into that chapter in verse 36 as Jesus tries to convince his disciples that he is really there with them in the flesh. So let's read verse 36 and following. While they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you frightened, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I, myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And yet for all their joy, they were still disbelieving and wondering. And he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" And they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. That's one of my favorite verses in Luke's gospel. And he took it and he ate it in their presence. What does the Lord have to say to us this morning? As I was thinking about this passage, this particular Easter season, it had a different effect on me, probably because of the context of a story that my sister-in-law told me this week. She had called me up and told me that her mother had a really disturbing experience. And I won't tell the whole story right now, but I'll just say that someone impersonated her granddaughter in a very convincing way. And those who got involved in this later believed that it was an AI impersonation. Someone used AI to impersonate her granddaughter. And some really nefarious things happened as a result of that. I'll get back to that story in a little bit. But human beings have a habit of trying to replace themselves or even replace each other again and again, and we use technology to do it, and we're doing it right now. It's not all bad. There's some good to it, and as I've been told many times, and I think it's true, with technology, there's always good, and there's always a bad side. But I was thinking about this idea of being replaced, of you might say my sister-in-law's mother's granddaughter being replaced by an AI over the phone. And it really got me thinking about it, because it's becoming increasingly hard to tell the difference between what's human and a clever imitation. Now, the Gospels are intent on saying that Jesus was not a clever imitation when he rose from the dead, but that Jesus was really and truly human and in the flesh. And I think that's an important point, not just about the resurrection, but about the whole mission of Jesus. to become truly human, to be human. And to paraphrase Athanasius in 300 AD, Christ became what we are so that we might become what Christ is. Let me say that again. Christ became what we are so that we might become what Christ is. I actually think that this core truth in the Christian faith is incredibly relevant right now. Jesus' mission to become really and truly human among us. There are many ways to see God. We see God in creation. We see God in other people. We see God in circumstances and divinely, I believe, orchestrated events in which God's presence is impressed upon us in real time. But it's the witness of Scripture and countless millions of people that Jesus himself is the invisible God made visible in human form, in human life. The Word that became flesh and dwelt among us. The mystery of the incarnation. And so Christians believe that Yeshua, Jesus, was fully God, yes, but that's not the whole truth. The Gospels also say that Jesus was fully and completely human. That's a beautiful truth. It's an important truth for us to understand about God and what God thinks about being human and what that means to be human today as God's people in a world in which the inhuman is often trying to take over the human. So I want us to think about that a little bit this morning. I'm going to pull back and I'm going to draw forward again into that point that I made earlier with my sister-in-law's Ruthie's story. But I want to start by just saying this, that Christ became what we are. Let's just start there. That as followers of Jesus, the Gospels tell us that Christ became what we are, and that is what? Fully human. Christ became fully human among us. Jesus was born of Mary. That's one of the first things we confess about Jesus. I read a beautiful phrase by Tifka Frymer-Hensky, who is a professor at Yale. She said, "Women are the portal through which all humankind has passed." That's a pretty powerful statement, just about women. But Jesus passed through that portal of woman. Jesus had a mother. And at 12 years old, he made his mom pretty frustrated and mad, I think, when he wandered off to the temple, started talking with the religious professionals, and his mom was like, "What are you doing? You didn't tell us that you were going to do that?" And we learned later that Jesus submitted to his parents from that point on, as he should. He did what his mom told him. We're very clear on that. And we know that Jesus displayed all the vulnerabilities of being fully human. In the desert, he got hungry. He suffered on the cross. He wept at the tomb of Lazarus. And he really and truly died. All the Gospels agree about that. He really suffered. He really died on a Roman cross. And when it comes to Easter, one mistake that people make is to picture Jesus' form as a ghostly hallucination or some kind of a spirit, something ethereal, something fantastic. When the disciples on the Emmaus Road return to say Jesus is alive, they don't claim to have seen a hallucination. They don't claim to have seen a phantom or a ghost. They're talking about seeing Jesus himself in the flesh. And notice that when Jesus says, when they think they are seeing a ghost, he says, "Hey, it's the real me. This is really me. Touch me and see. For a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." It's hard to really, I think, take in the importance of these descriptions of Jesus because there was nothing like it. I mean, now we've been doing it for 2,000 years. Every Easter, we talk about Jesus' appearance, risen from the dead in his physical form. But you need to understand that in the ancient world, there was nothing up to that point that described a resurrection body like what is described in the New Testament. Sure, there were a lot of descriptions of ghosts in myth and legends, people who appeared in a ghostly form, but there was no no account like that in the Gospels. An historical person who actually comes back from the dead, and in the way that he comes back from the dead, in the special way that his body is described, there was nothing like it. Someone who sounds, feels, eats like an ordinary person. I think if someone was going to make up a story about a resurrected Jesus, they could have used more special effects. You know, he had no halo. He had no reverberating voice. He just looked very ordinary. He looked very much like a regular person. No radiating clothes. None of that. None of the stuff that we actually sometimes use to show that Jesus is risen from the dead in art and picture. He appears as very plain, very ordinary, but in fairness to the disciples, Jesus did need to say, hey, I'm not a ghost. And why is that? Well, because regular human beings don't travel at the speed of thought. They don't go from the road to Emmaus to the upper room and head you off at the pass before you get there, right? They don't walk through walls. They don't travel at the speed of thought. So Jesus' body was not just physical, it was something more, but it was recognizable. You could touch it, you could feel it, you could give Jesus a hug. He could be touched. He was real. He could eat a piece of broiled fish. Why? Why would Jesus eat a piece of broiled fish? We're not told, but evidently he could do it. Only certain Jews believed that the resurrection would actually happen at the end of time. But some did. No Jews believed that it would happen to anyone in the middle of time, as it happened to Jesus. So what's described here in the middle of time happening to Jesus is completely unprecedented, and there was no reason to make it up because they weren't expecting the Messiah to die or be risen from the dead. So once again, it's an anomaly. It's something unique. It's something no one would have expected. There's no reason for the Gospels to make it up. They could have said he was a ghost, and people would have said, oh, that's fine. But they didn't say that. They said, no, this was not a ghost. It was actually Jesus. We touched him. He ate a piece of broiled fish. It's weird. It's different. It's a transformed kind of body and physical experience. So let me repeat myself again. Jesus walked among us as nothing less than a fully human being. So important. He ate with us, he slept with us, he laughed with us, he walked, he talked with us, he suffered with us, he died with us. And even when he was raised from death, it was not as a ghost or a phantom or a hallucination. It was as a real, embodied, albeit transformed human being. It's the real me, Jesus says. It's the real me. Believe it. Touch me and see. And having said all this, I'm aware of a very important statistic, and that is that while 2/3, believe it or not, 66% of adults in the United States actually believe Jesus rose from the dead. That was actually higher than I expected. 66% evidently believe Jesus rose from the dead. 32% of those don't really see what difference it makes for their lives, right? It's like, oh yeah, sure, Jesus rose from the dead. There's a great Hebrew scholar, Pinchas Lapida, who is an Orthodox scholar, and he wrote a whole book about this. He says, I believe that Jesus historically rose from the dead. I believe that. But I don't believe he was the Messiah. Really interesting. Great book. So a lot of people believe Jesus rose from the dead, but not a lot of people believe it makes any difference. And that's why, even as you're listening to me right now, I realize you're sitting in your seat going, yeah, I've heard this before. So what? What difference does it make? And today we could talk about how Jesus' resurrection heightens the importance of his ethical teaching. You're like, hey, wait a minute. He rose from the dead. Maybe we should go back and listen to what he said again. Let's read that. Let's think about what he said, or how it gives us power for living, or hope and suffering, or even the hope and the joy of a life beyond death. But today I want to underscore something even more basic, that Jesus' life and death and resurrection is a call to be more human. It's a call to be more human, not less. Christ became what we are so that we might become what Christ is. Fully human and more like what God intended. More like what God intended. Human beings have a habit, as I began by saying today, of replacing themselves. We have a bad habit of doing that. And with the advance of artificial intelligence, it's becoming even easier even more difficult to tell the difference between what's truly human and what's a clever imitation. And as I said, my sister-in-law called me recently to tell me that her mother got a phone call from someone who sounded exactly like her granddaughter and convinced her that she had been in a major car accident. She was at the hospital. She didn't have her wallet. She didn't have any money on her. There was somebody else involved. And I don't remember all the details because it took Ruthie about 20 minutes to tell me the story. She said I could tell you, by the way. I got her permission. And she said that this person who sounded like her granddaughter was going to send a member of this family who was in the accident over to pick up some money that she agreed to pull out of the bank. And her mother pulled over $10,000 out of the bank and gave it to this person. And they're almost 100% certain that this person was impersonating, because she knows her granddaughter very well. They have a very close relationship, that this was her granddaughter on the phone. It sounded exactly like her. By the way, don't be surprised if within the next couple of years you don't get a phone call from me, someone impersonating me, because my voice is digitized on the internet. I'm sure somebody could pull a sample of my voice and then impersonate me on the phone. I'm sure it's going to happen to anyone who has contact with a lot of people. So what I'm saying is, be wise. Have a conversation with the real person. Call them up. Call them up. Verify. Be careful. It's one of the reasons why I'm telling you this story. Don't be manipulated. If your voice is digitized on Facebook or Instagram, be very careful. If you're a pastor and your voice is on the internet, be really careful. You can be impersonated. And it's already happening right now in a lot of different ways. Music artists are being impersonated. Music styles are being impersonated. I'm sure there will be some really good applications of AI. If they can find a cure for cancer, I'm all for it. I'll be the first person in line to sing its praises. But like any technology, it's just a tool, right? It's just a tool. It's not the technology that we should be wary of. It's the human beings who use the technology, right? And how we may be tempted to misuse it, because we human beings have a habit of trying to blot out or replace ourselves with technology, right? We see it all the time. It's an artificial, it's an artificial device that detects movement, and it can rock your baby in the cradle. It's an automated kind of device. It's basically a robot, and it'll sing your baby to sleep and do all the work for you. He thought it was great. He was telling me about it. Yeah, we're going to get so much more sleep. There are robots that today that offer simulated intimacy with latex limbs. There are AIs that might write your school paper for you these days. Or maybe this sermon that I'm preaching right now. And while I did not use AI, I did go on the internet and I did do some research, so I am thankful for that. And we also have AIs that are being developed to detect plagiarism by AIs. We have AIs that can imitate the voice and music of your favorite artist. They're doing it right now. They're generating music that sounds like your favorite artist, or make your favorite artist sound younger, like he sang in the 70s. Paul McCartney in the 70s, singing a 2023 song. Or they can impersonate your granddaughter. Again, it's not the technology that we have to be worried about. It's how we choose to use it. And we know there are machines, beautiful machines, that help assist surgeons in complicated life-saving procedures. Thank God for that, right? There are AIs that detect disease and help us to cure it. There are AIs that help us explore the stars and help us study the scriptures. There are machines like the one on my belt right. They're monitoring my blood sugar every 5 minutes, keeping me alive. So I'm not anti-technology. I'm wearing it on my belt. And maybe someday they'll have an AI that can predict an earthquake 30 minutes before it happens. That would be awesome. So, what would the risen Jesus say about all of this stuff? The risen Jesus who said, "Hey, it's me, touch me and see." What would Jesus do? And the Gospels remind us again and again that Christ came to dwell with us as a fully human being. And he said, "It's the real me. It's the real me. Touch me and see." And our faith affirms, therefore, the value of the human being and the created world. And the resurrection of Jesus means that there's a glorious future for the real me. And even a transformed real me. I believe that. I hope you believe it. So whatever the future holds or what new technologies are to discover, let's agree about this. Let's agree to become like Jesus. Let's agree to become more human and not less. And to guard the humanity and the dignity of our neighbor. And to make the phone call and to check in on someone we love and to write a personal note. To be more human, to sit down and to eat some broiled fish or maybe some broccoli with friends. We're going to be doing dinners for 8 next month. How about sitting down with some real people, not virtually, but sitting down face to face with real people and having a beautiful meal together? How about standing with those in trouble? How about visiting the sick and caring for the stranger in the flesh? How about being a flesh and blood presence so close that we can be seen and touched and felt and heard and hugged? So if we human beings are in danger of letting ourselves be replaced, let's pledge before God to be less replaceable. Let's become more compassionate. Let's become more selfless. Let's become more honest, more courageous, more ethical, more generous, more personal, more loving, more divinely human. Let's become more, much more like Jesus. Let's take a moment right now in silent prayer. Amen. By the way, for those of you who don't know, that was Bill Augustine playing there, and he's been with the Lord for about a year now, and we miss him. We'll see him again.